Hello everyone, I'm Demi Crinion and welcome to our Lenten study on the Discernment of Spirits. We are going to be taking the next 6 weeks to dive into this book right here, The Discernment of Spirits by Father Timothy Gallagher. Now, the Discernment of Spirits is something that was originally given to us by St. Ignatius of Loyola. And this is a guideline for us when it comes to how we respond to the different spiritual movements that we experience within our hearts. Sometimes those movements lead us to happiness and joy and peace, and sometimes those stirrings result in discouragement or anxiety and fear. And so St. Ignatius gives us a method for identifying those movements of the heart, being able to understand them, and then giving us a practical guide for how we are to respond to them. Now, you can kind of consider this a Discernment of Spirits 101, if you will. Ignatius's initial writings on this, some people have found difficult to understand, and so Father Timothy Gallagher wrote this book, which really goes into them. Each one of the rules, there are 14, goes into them in depth and really breaks this down for us in a way that's easy for us to understand. Today we are going to be doing sort of an introduction and laying the foundation for understanding what this is all about and some of the language that's used in it, so that when we do start to break down those rules in the coming weeks, we have a good starting point. So that's going to be our task for today. And as I was putting together this study, I came across a series of videos that Father Gallagher has done on this as well. They are videos on YouTube, but it's just has a static picture. It's more of a podcast. It's in an interview format. So just know that they are there for you if you would like to dive into this topic a little further. So the book and the videos by Father Gallagher are not required, but they will certainly add a level of depth to this topic that I think will be beneficial for everyone. We are also going to be linking to a downloadable resource for you right below this video that has some additional questions and things for you to think about and reflect on throughout the weeks. All right, so let's talk about this topic a little more in depth. As I said, this originally comes to us from St. Ignatius. St. Ignatius was from Spain, and he was born into a fairly wealthy family. He originally worked as a page for a relative who was in a very high level of authority, and then he was eventually recruited into service as a knight. And so this is how he spent the first chapter of his life. He was very much a man of the world and about conquest and notoriety. He himself talks about how he was drawn to worldly desires and the pull of the world, and this is very much what marks conquest, sort of marks his early life. And in one of these battles that he is in, defending one of the cities against the French, a cannonball goes right through his legs, right in between them, and it severely damages one of his legs, and it damages the other one as well, just not as severely. And in that moment, his career, what has marked his life up to this point, comes to an abrupt halt, and he is taken to a medical facility. And the French eventually return him to his hometown for him to recover. And when he gets there, they realize that the bone in his leg was set incorrectly, and it sort of has one bone protruding over the other. And Ignatius does not like the way this looks, and he wants them to reset it. And the doctors tell him this will be a very painful procedure. This isn't a time where there is no anesthesia. So in order to set this correctly, they were going to have to go in, re-break the bone, reset it, and it was going to be a very extensive and painful procedure. Again, no morphine, no anesthesia, nothing to help him in the way we would now. And he says, do it. So the doctors performed this procedure, and they said Ignatius made hardly a peep as they were breaking the bone and performing this medical procedure. And that is sort of a characteristic, this level of courage that Ignatius displays, certainly in his early life, and even here the stoicism and courage that he displays even in this medical bed. But this procedure that he has done requires quite an extensive recovery. So he is on bed rest for a long time. And during a time when there is no TV, no smartphones, no internet, no social media, nothing like that. And so he requests some reading material. And his sister-in-law brings him the only 2 books that she owns. One of them is on the life of Christ, and the other is on the lives of the saints. And so Ignatius, perhaps not by choice, begins reading about Christ and the saints. And as he is reading these books, he realizes that there is perhaps a different kind of courage that he has never considered before, a moral courage that has never occurred to him, or that has never appealed to him, and that he's never really pursued. So he is thinking about this, and he's thinking, what if I tried to live my life like St. Francis? What if I tried to live my life like some of these saints that I'm reading about? And this becomes, he uses the term project. This, as Ignatius is reading, he also has a lot of time on his hands just to think. And so he spends a lot of time thinking through his mind on these projects, he's calling them. So this particular project, him thinking and spending time about what it would be like to live life as one of the saints, or like the saints, to try to emulate that holiness. This becomes his holy project, and he spends a lot of time thinking about what this would look like and how he could do that. But he also has a second project that consumes his thoughts, and this he calls his worldly project. There's a particular woman that he wants to win over, and he spends so much time thinking about how he can pursue her, how this woman becomes sort of a worldly conquest in his mind. And in his writings, we get the idea that she is sort of out of reach, at sort of some sort of higher level of society that is sort of unattainable, and yet he spends a lot of time on this worldly project thinking about how he can win her over and what he could do. At this point, he says that he is given a grace, and the term he uses is that his eyes were opened a little. He began to realize something as he's thinking about these 2 different projects, this holy project and this worldly project. His eyes are open to how he is feeling. And he notices that while he is thinking about these projects, both of them, he feels engaged and excited and is all in, sort of, when he's thinking about them at the time. But once he puts those thoughts aside and goes on his day or onto something else, he realizes that there is a difference. With the worldly project, he's very engaged while he's thinking about it. But once he turns away from it, he notices that he is later left feeling discouraged and empty. In contrast, when he is thinking about the holy project, what it would be like to live like a saint, he also notices that he feels engaged and excited while he's thinking about it. But afterwards, he is still left feeling with a lightness of heart and a happiness. And once he makes this distinction and understands that one of these is leading him towards God and one of these is leading him away from God, and he realizes that there are other things at play here that are leading him one way or the other, he discards the worldly project and he pursues this quest towards holiness. And his life forever changes from that moment on. St. Ignatius goes on from this period, and he develops this idea much more and gives us what we have now as the discernment of spirits. There are 3 key points sort of that go along with this that I want you to remember and keep in mind as we begin to break down these specific rules in future weeks. So the first one is to be aware. The first thing that enabled Ignatius to make that movement towards God and away from a worldly pull was that he was able to be aware of what was happening, how he was feeling as he thought about these things. And so the first thing we need to have is an awareness. How do I feel when I am thinking about a particular thing? How do I feel afterwards? After I've spent that time daydreaming, thinking in detail about it, and I go on with my day, how am I left feeling? So there's a level of awareness that we need to have. The second is understanding. So maybe we might be aware that those things are happening, or we might be feeling a certain way, but we also need to be able to take the time to really reflect on them and take the time to figure out and understand where those are coming from. Which of these things are from God and which of them are not? And then the third step is to take action. We take action on that item, we either reject it because it is not of God, or we embrace it because it is. So these are the things that St. Ignatius and Father Timothy Gallagher are going to help guide us in over these next 6 weeks. And what is really incredible about these is that St. Ignatius is not giving us another devotion that we need to add or that takes extra time. These are all things that we can apply to our everyday life as we are going through the day-to-day. He's asking himself, what would my life look like if I tried to live like the saints? We can ask ourselves, what would our lives look like if we were able to go through our day with our eyes spiritually open and awake to what these different movements of the heart are occurring within us, and taking the time to understand them and then act accordingly. All right, so that is going to be our focus for these next 6 weeks. Next week, we will be getting into rules 1 and 2. So if you have any questions, please let us know. You can drop them in the comments if you're watching this on social media, or certainly shoot us an email if you're watching this on our parish website. We are so glad you are joining us. We are excited to get into this topic with you. God bless, and we will see you next week for rules 1 and 2.